Good day everyone. So obviously with Nilou's release we've gotten a character that is very unique, a bit of like a different way of dealing damage and so on, and obviously with any new character there always comes like criticisms, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions about the character and so on. Some call her an incomplete unit, some people say that, you know, outside of her niche she's not really that good. So let's address all of these sort of concerns and so on. So the first criticism is that she's not really anything outside a Dendro-Hydro sort of team. So if you take her outside of that, well, she loses her Ascension 1 passive. And whilst that is technically correct, yes, she does lose out on the ability to generate bountiful cores. She doesn't lose out on the ability to generate dendro cores at all. She doesn't lose out on the ability to still be useful in sort of burgeon, hyper bloom sort of teams and so on. And this is the thing that a lot of people kind of miss out on with Nilou. Even though the functional aspects of a dendro or a bountiful core are lost, there are still some other aspects about her kit that can be useful. It's not that you're losing out on your off-field hydro, for instance. And this is the thing a lot of people need to understand. What is the degree of loss that we've suffered from now taking Nilou outside of a Dendro Hydro only sort of team? And is that now going to impede us and not give us enough functionality and to sort of clear the spiral abyss? And if, let's say, we have enough functionality to clear, is it still then sufficient enough for us to do so consistently and comfortably in the absence of any reasonable alternatives that we could have used and so on? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, there is enough in Nilou's kit to justify using her outside of just the sort of teams that she was intended to be used in. And I do think that the design of giving a 5-star character a very strong niche is kind of justified, because what is the alternative? The alternative would be something silly like boosting all sorts of, let's say, dendro core damage, whether it's burgeon, hyperbloom, and so on. And in which case you have to be like so careful as like a game developer, because you can very easily end up making it so broken, or you can make it like very underwhelming, in which case what would be the point of Nilou? And I haven't yet seen an argument from the theory crafting community to say that, look, if they had instead gone with this design and these are the numbers to sort of increase general dendro core damage or whatever else they would want, then she would be in a better position. I've not seen someone do that functional design spec or any mathematics, or even better than some stupid spreadsheet, give us a proper stochastic simulation, run some simulation software with an alternatives design for Nilou, and then argue that that would be ultimately better. No one has done it. Instead, people just sort of criticize. And from my personal experience, when people criticize characters like this, that they haven't really sunk in the time or put in the effort to actually play the character or borrow an account of someone that does have the character, and just sort of try and test out the character and see exactly why the niche works as it does, and then perhaps start thinking practically what would it have been if it had been something else, like just boosting general dendro core damage and so on. In any case, enough about that. The second point that I see a lot of people sort of criticize Nilou and the teams for is the fact that the current Spiral Abyss seems to be handmade for Nilou. You know, the enemies are grouped together. But I think this is also kind of a bit of a bad argument, because there are a lot of teams that can actually suffer if you cannot group up the enemies, or if the enemies like run away. And no, you can't always group up big enemies with Kazuha Venti and so on, because they might just have resistance, or they're just immune to CC, in which case you're gonna suffer. Sukokomon suffers when Magokenki like dashes around, or you have like a ruined serpent, as does many other teams in Genshin Impact. Once again, we're trying to criticize Nilou and her niche, and we don't understand that a lot of these criticisms apply to a lot of the other and teams that are even meta teams themselves. And from my perspective, one of the key things that you can do as a player in Genshin Impact is understanding how to manage the playing field and the AI. So for instance, with Magokenki, a lot of the time we push him towards the boundary, because that just makes life so much easier. And of course, in Nilou's case, if you have an enemy that like stands very far apart from her, the only requirement for you to trigger a sort of bountiful core on the enemy is hitting them with Dendro and Hydro. like, and pay attention to that. It doesn't matter where you are on the field, as long as you can get Dendro or Hydro to the enemy, no matter where they are on the field, you will be able to trigger that bountiful call. And this is the key thing. It's not about distance, it's about the ease in which you can apply your elements. And it's very easy to imagine a character in the future that applies like Hydro missiles towards the enemy, like Yai's totems or Dendro missiles, and in which case the problem of range is not really going to be that much of a problem. And the other thing that a lot of people also seem to miss is, even if you have a bunch of enemies that are spread out, typically a lot of enemies in Genshin Impact means that each one of those enemies has less health than a big fat single target boss and so on. And if it does, yes, and if it does so happen that you can't hit all of them with your bountiful cores and so on, then take the time penalty. I mean, you've got 3 minutes to get all of your clear stars in the on each floor in the spiral abyss. Like, losing out a couple of seconds and so on is really not the end of the world, especially when a lot of people, including myself, have done countless videos showing you how to do it with 4-star characters and 4-star only weapons. It's certainly not such a make or break kind of deal as a lot of people tend to make it out to be. And of course, the enemy AI in Genshin Impact has a tendency to come towards the player. So it's very often that if you are very skillful in your positioning, you can at least, let's say, take out 75% of the enemies with your bountiful cores. And yes, if there is an enemy that's now outside of your AoE, you can then sort of go and finish them up afterwards, in which case, for most practical purposes, actually sometimes a good thing, because then you can really start recharging your elemental burst and managing your elemental burst for the next floor and so on, which is something that a lot of these speedrunning teams tend to suffer unless you use very specific units in very specific ways in order to make sure that you have like a smooth continuous run. But that is getting on the more sort of technical side. So to finally just sort of wrap it up, yeah, Nilou has a niche, and it's a very strong niche, and she is functional outside of that niche as well. And enemies being spread out is really not the end of the world, because them being spread out can also be the end of the world for a lot of other teams as well. So in my opinion, it's just all about your skill and your understanding of the AI. So a lot of these takes that I've seen from theory crafters and from the community at large, they're not, they just lack a modicum of practicality, and that's kind of what rubs me the wrong way. Nilou is a great character. She's a good, solid character, and I wish more people would just sort of acknowledge it.